What's up, everybody? Forgive the nasally cold voice, and yo, Joe. I promise it's still Disthunder from the Foosh, and today we're going to talk about the Mezco 112 Collective Roadblock. Now, everyone's favorite sous chef and heavy machine gunner, Mr. Marvin Hinton of Biloxi, Mississippi, made many appearances in the Deke and Sunbow G.I. Joe cartoons, obviously, where he had an interesting penchant for rhyming, which I don't think anybody anywhere was ever a fan of. However, in the comic book, in fact, issue number 22 from 1984 of the Marvel Comics G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, Roadblock showed up alongside Duke in probably the most memorable scene in the whole original series for me, where they provided security for General Flagg's funeral. If I remember right, a Cobra Rattler shows up and tries to strafe the funeral procession, and Duke and Roadblock dispatch it with extreme prejudice, which after that, Duke then proceeds to dress down the entire unit, telling them their tactics and their security is absolute shit. It's pretty hard to argue with your new boss when his right-hand man is carrying around a 150-pound machine gun on his shoulders. I think it's that massive stature and strength combined with the fact that the guy refuses to eat crappy MRE food that's probably the reason why I think everybody, grunt or otherwise, would love to have had a guy like Roadblock in their squad. In the comics, I think he carried a rank of corporal or sergeant, and then for some reason I was under the impression he was a sergeant major for the majority of the G.I. Joe run, but that may not be true. That's the trouble when you have 30 years of lore spread over different types of media when it comes to these characters. It's tough to figure out important little needle details like rank. Speaking of media, regardless of his stripes, Roadblock is definitely one of those key few Joe characters that transcend from just, say, the comics or the toys or the TV show into just about every form of G.I. Joe media there is. You may remember him being portrayed by the most electrifying man in sports entertainment back in 2009's cinematic adaptation, but he also at least features in, if not prominently, the little mini-series DVD and VHS inclusions in later G.I. Joe lines like Spy Troops or Venom vs. Valor. He was in G.I. Joe Resolute and Renegades, and Resolute is still one of my favorite G.I. Joe cartoons ever to exist. And although he doesn't appear in Sigma 6, his cousin, apparently, Heavy Duty, does. He has a similar appreciation for heavy machine gunnery, although apparently he's not as good of a cook as Roadblock is. He's a selectable character in the 1992 NES game G.I. Joe Rise of Atlantis, which is not a fantastic game, but I own it anyway. Much more successfully, though, he is one of 4 playable characters in the G.I. Joe arcade game from the same year. And I'm also hopeful that he will make an appearance in the upcoming G.I. Joe side-scroller that's coming out for Switch sometime next year. Let's jump back over to the figure side of things, and there is really nothing better to talk about than Roadblock's Loadout. This figure comes with 6 pineapple grenades, an Alice suspender rig, and a Grenadier-style tactical vest with 2 thigh drop holsters that can go on either set. Comes with a tactical helmet, 3 variant heads, and an assortment of hands to hold all his various weaponry. As you would expect, his weapons make up the bulk of his accessories, and we can start with his fighting knife, which I wish it had a sheath somewhere on one of his rigs, although it is a very nicely detailed piece, and worst comes to worst, you could put it in his backpack if you have to. Next up would be what I consider the most versatile weapon in his arsenal, which is an M249 saw, which looks like it's been chopped. I say that because it's got a shorter barrel and a skeletonized stock, which does telescope. The carry handle on top can pivot left or right, and it is, of course, blast effect compatible. The only accessory I think it could have done with is maybe having an optional swap for the box mag to a 5.56 Stanag. But that's a little thing, and of course stuff like that starts up on the count and makes it easier to lose things. That also goes for his M9 variant, which stores nicely in that drop holster. Likewise, very good looking pistol. Unfortunately, they've dispensed with the removable magazine or the slide that we've had on some, if not most, of the other Mezco pistols. Not a huge deal, I just bring it up just so you're aware. The reason I can easily forgive that little stuff is because this Browning M2 Stinger he comes with. This magnificent weapon can be used on the included tripod that stores inside the backpack when not in use. You just pull out the classic spade grip and get him into a prone position and he's ready to go. Or you can pack that whole mess into his backpack and he can run it Blaine Predator style with an inverted pistol grip and a forward carry handle like the minigun from that movie. I mentioned on my Instagram page there is sort of a historical precedent for a Stinger-type weapon like this. The Browning M1919 was turned into a Stinger by the Marine Corps during the Pacific Theater of World War II. And I believe it earned at least one of its operators a Medal of Honor for its efforts. And in reality, the M2 is one of the most versatile guns ever built. We put it on everything. We put it on aircraft, we put it on armored vehicles, we put it on top of Humvees. So who's to say Roadblock can't put one in a backpack and take it with him? Moving over to articulation, Roadblock makes out pretty good for a bigger figure, I think. He has the standard double ball jointed neck, the ball joint that goes down to the collar, and then the upper ball joint you swap the heads on and off of. That lower joint doesn't get a ton of range of motion, but the upper joint does like you would expect it to, so he gets a good amount of swivel and tilt and expression that way. He has what I think are newly sculpted arms, which are even different from, say, Bishop's arms, which I think they look fantastic. There is no butterfly joint, though. For whatever reason, they seem to be moving away from that. However, he did get those excellent new double-jointed elbows, which was a welcome improvement on the figure, and I will trade that over butterflies any day of the week. He has the usual ball-jointed wrists, like you would also expect, as well as the usual double-jointed torso. Depending on his loadout, you get a pretty decent range forward and back. Back is important, especially because that helps you get him into a prone firing position, which is a little stiff, but given his size, that's still not bad. Lower waist joint, as you would also expect. Ball-jointed hips with a very good range out, and double-jointed knee with a decent range back, and a good and sturdy ball-jointed ankle. The loadout really doesn't affect this figure's posability for the most part, especially when you do the Alice rig suspenders like I've got on here. If you swap to the V2 vest, it is still pretty flexible, so it still allows for that movement, but obviously this gives you the most. Those rigs can be swapped out via a peg hidden behind one of the pouches on, I think it's on the right side. And then there are the two drop-down pieces that you just peg those back in depending on which rig you're running on his torso. Pretty clever solution, and one I'm grateful for because I would have very likely had to buy two of this figure if that were not an option. Next, for size comparisons, we have the G.I. Joe classified Retro Card Baroness and the Televiper from the Trouble Bubble set. And as you can see, even if you're not just a regular 112 collector and you're a G.I. Joe classified collector, this is not going to be a problem for you. The height is comparable to the Televiper, although Roadblock is considerably bigger. And actually, looking at the way I've got these posed here, I think Roadblock is still a little bit taller. He obviously towers over Baroness, which is as it should be. But yeah, I'm definitely warming up to the idea of this kind of mixed collection. For whatever reason, the Mezco G.I. Joe seem to have a kind of complementary style that goes with these Hasbro ones. Of course, then I stand up next to the Mezco 112 Destro, and I know fully damn well this is where my collection is headed from here on out, whether I want it to or not. And don't worry, because I very much want that to be the case. I think they look excellent together, and I'm a little surprised to say I think Destro is just a teeny bit taller than he is, and they're also more comparable in mass than I maybe would have expected. Lining them up back to back here, you can see just barely that chrome dome is just slightly higher. Some of that's the collar as well. The shoulder looks like it sits just a teeny bit taller as well, so I think I'm right in saying so. It's a minimal height difference, and it makes me think both these guys are going to be just massive in comparison to the other Joes, which is just fine by me. And lastly, for consistency, here he is with Supreme Knight Batman, who is not quite as big as Roadblock. Roadblock's actually a little thicker than Batman is, although Batman is also a teeny bit taller, mostly because of those giant boots. The important thing here is a crossover that's been going on in my backyard and in my head for the better part of 35 years is starting to look more and more, actually, scratch that, it's starting to look a lot better than my imagination was ever capable of delivering. You know, I'm going to try and spare you my usual platitude where I drone on about how highly I recommend a figure, because if it's Mezco and it's G.I. Joe, I'm going to tell you to buy probably two each. Hell with just recommending buying one. But I can honestly say this is one of the most fun figures I've picked up in, well, probably since Destro. And that means the fact that this little subline of 112 Collective is starting to pick up some steam now has me absolutely elated. You combine that with the fact that Hasbro's G.I. Joe Classified line really can't seem to miss lately, especially with the vehicles. And you got me kind of starting to think maybe the best years of G.I. Joe are yet to come. Like I mentioned in my Destro review, it's such a welcome change to feel like this massive 180 from where I felt like G.I. Joe was headed, you know, not even 5 or 6 years ago. And it feels like every couple weeks I see something else or another pre-order drops and I just get that much more excited again about this property, which is easy because it's a property that's been near and dear to my heart for most of my life. So I love Roadblock very, very much. I also love Mezco toys very, very, very much. Thank you so much for helping me get one to review, and please get that snake eyes out quick as you can. Until then, thanks for watching, and we will talk again soon. Thanks for putting up with my nasally cold voice too. Appreciate it.